cigar, and you see with tattoos on their face, but we like, damn, what we got to lose? If we don't pop now, we going back to the hood. This is when I knew Eminem was real. He's like, I don't give a man. This is when I knew, I'm like, damn, Eminem is a real.
Looked at him, and he took a puff of his cigar, and he blew it out, and he did like this, and they left.
When you hear the name Suge Knight, you instantly know this is not a man you cross lightly. He was feared, respected, and downright untouchable in the streets of Los Angeles. But here's the twist. Two rappers didn't flinch when Suge's shadow loomed over the game. 50 Cent and Eminem stood tall against him, and that alone shocked the whole hip-hop world. Back then, everyone knew the unspoken rule. Once you had beef with Suge Knight, your days of moving around freely were basically over. The man wasn't just a label boss. He had a reputation for life or death intimidation. And people whispered about planned hits like it was everyday business. Yet somehow, 50 and M still tangled with him head on, sharing stories later of threats that sounded more like mob movies than music beefs. The craziest part? They weren't even shaking when they told them. Suge Knight wasn't just running Death Row Records, he was running entire blocks at the same time.
Trying to change a little bit. Like, was somebody from the barbershop like punch you and knock you out after that? Like, you be knocked out like from the guy from the barbershop do that? It changed.
Imagine holding the charts with Snoop, Dre, and Tupac, and still holding the streets with that same iron grip. That's how dangerous Suge's empire was. But here's the scandal that rattled his legend. Two outsiders from a whole different lane didn't bend to his pressure. For Suge, it was strange, almost insulting. He was used to rappers folding under his glare, but Eminem and 50 acted like they were immune. That made them unpredictable, and unpredictability scared even Suge. Their reckless courage set them apart. While everyone else dropped their heads when Suge's name was mentioned, these two stayed calm, cool, and untouchable, staring right back at the so-called boogeyman of hip-hop. Suge Knight wasn't just a record producer, he was the boogeyman of hip-hop. As the co-founder of Death Row Records, he delivered platinum hits to the world, but behind the music was a man surrounded by blood, fear, and chaos. His reputation didn't come from the beats, it came from the violence that followed him everywhere. The whispers never stopped. Was Suge tied to Tupac's murder? The night Pac was gunned down in Las Vegas. Suge was right there in the car. That fact alone made the streets buzz with conspiracy.
He's never afraid of the world. He's always giggling. And I remember this story. It's why I always say, are you enlightened?
Some say Suge orchestrated the whole thing. Others believe he was a target too. But one thing's for sure. His name has been stamped onto one of the darkest nights in hip-hop forever. And this wasn't the first time Suge's name got tied to threats and intimidation. One of the wildest stories? Vanilla Ice. Legend has it, Suge rolled up with his crew, roughed up Ice's bodyguards, and even threatened to dangle Vanilla off a hotel balcony unless he handed over the rights to Ice Ice Baby. That move turned Suge into a living urban legend, someone who got what he wanted by sheer terror. But Suge's rap sheet didn't stop there. He racked up charges from trafficking to assault and even beat down a family member at one point. The courts knew his name, the cops knew his face, and the industry feared his temper. Add to that his well-known ties to the Bloods, and the rumors exploded that Suge wasn't just running a record label, he was running a gang operation dressed up as music. The feud between Suge Knight and Eminem wasn't just industry gossip, it was war in the shadows. By this point, Suge had already carved out his reputation as one of the most feared men in music. He wasn't just a boss, he was the guy who could make you vanish if you got in his way.
They was not scared of Suge Knight. They was terrified.
Even comedian Cat Williams once painted the picture of how ruthless the rap game had become, pointing out the shift from lyrical beefs to real-life violence, saying drill rappers were now throwing their dead friends in there with no remorse. That's the type of environment where Suge thrived, and Eminem was about to step straight into it. When M was breaking out in the late 90s and early 2000s, he was already climbing fast, breaking barriers as a white rapper in a black-dominated scene, and that alone made him a target. Suge Knight saw him as a threat, someone who could shift the power dynamic of the entire rap world, and Suge wasn't about to let that slide. Anyone who looked like they might outshine his empire was marked.
My bodyguards who had guns, and they had their people which had guns, and they had us outpowered and outnumbered.
And Eminem quickly landed on that list. According to insiders, Suge wasn't just throwing empty threats, he was plotting to take M out completely. Believe it or not, there were multiple attempts on his life. Byron Big Naz Williams, Eminem's former bodyguard, later revealed shocking details. He claimed Suge Knight actually tried to have Eminem killed twice. One of the scariest incidents allegedly happened in 2001 at the Source Hip Hop Awards. That was right when Eminem was at the height of his fame with My Name Is, and Suge's crew was prowling the scene. Big Naz, who had been skeptical at first about working with Eminem, said he quickly realized the danger was real. From the very first night Big Naz linked up with Eminem, the job turned deadly serious. What started as a chance for Naz to rub shoulders with music executives and maybe build his career as a producer instantly shifted into something darker, protecting Eminem's life from real threats in the industry. He wasn't just security, he was standing between M and the devil himself. Big Naz even admitted it straight. I was working against the devil. And through the grace of God, Master P and Priority Records put a deal together that was suitable for me.
If you shoot somebody, you go to jail forever. Some kids, you don't want to go to jail forever, right?
But behind that blessing came chaos, because the 2001 Source Hip Hop Awards became ground zero for their first direct clash with Suge Knight and his crew. Now, anybody who knows the Source Awards history will tell you, it was never just about trophies. Those shows had a reputation for fights, chaos, and even shootings. Big Naz said the energy in that building was pure tension. The seating arrangements only made it worse. Supposedly designed so artists could network, the reality was brutal. It meant rivals, enemies, and even sworn street ops were sitting side by side. That setup was a recipe for disaster, and everyone in the room knew it. Naz recalled M walking toward his seat, and that's when things felt off. The artists were split away from their bodyguards, almost like it was intentional, like the perfect chance for someone with a grudge to make a move. And who was lurking right there in the mix? Suge Knight and his henchmen, eyes locked on Eminem. Big Naz said flat out, it didn't feel like coincidence, it felt like a setup. M was exposed, the crew was scattered, and history told them the Source Awards was the type of place where gunfire was practically expected. Back then, the rap game was a powder keg ready to blow.
Doing those things you rapping about, you talking about, I can respect that.
Right.
If somebody else writing your rhymes, somebody else, is you telling somebody else's story, that really don't mean nothing.
The Source Awards had already built a reputation for chaos, and the organizers were terrified that one wrong move could spark a full-on riot. But even with all their precautions, nobody could have predicted how wild the night would get once Suge Knight's name entered the mix. Eminem and his crew thought they were safe, surrounded by fame and flashing cameras. But behind the lights, real street politics were unfolding. M wasn't just a rising rapper. He was walking into the middle of a war between Suge Knight's Death Row Records and Dr. Dre's camp. The tension exploded when Eminem went to take his seat. Out of nowhere, a mob of men in red shirts circled him, chanting "Death Row," and claiming they were sent by Suge himself to stir up trouble. The room froze. For a split second, it looked like the award show was about to turn into a battlefield. Eminem's camp realized instantly they weren't safe at all. They were pawns in a dangerous power struggle, and Suge's crew wanted to make a statement. That's when Big Naz proved his worth. He didn't hesitate. He immediately flagged down Dr. Dre and his bodyguards, warning them that this was a setup.
Motherfuckers trying to, man, what they trying to do? What do they want? I don't understand. What do they want? I say, hey, man, they want you.
The plan shifted from celebration to survival mode. From that night forward, Naz treated Eminem's protection like a war mission. He made sure there was always an escape plan, a car ready outside in case things went left. But even that wasn't easy. Security only allowed limos to linger at the red carpet for a short time, meaning there was no quick getaway if chaos broke out inside. That forced Dre's bodyguards to stay in full beast mode backstage, watching every move, ready to throw down if Suge's crew pressed forward.
So it was a duality of beef going on at the same time during the time I was protecting this guy.
Big Naz himself stood front and center, body locked and eyes scanning the crowd, ready to fight off anyone who dared step to Eminem. Even with chaos swirling around him, Eminem didn't fold. He stood his ground like a soldier, staring down Suge Knight's crew without flinching. Big Naz swore this was proof of M's fearlessness. He refused to run, even when Suge's men threatened his life right there in the open. But that was just round one. According to Naz, Suge wasn't done. He tried again, and this time the setting was way more unexpected. Sunny Hawaii. What was supposed to be a peaceful getaway turned into a battlefield in paradise. Big Naz revealed they got word ahead of time. Suge Knight was planning to strike while Eminem was attending an event with Snoop Dogg and Dr. Director The Whispers were chilling. Suge had allegedly sent 50 of his thugs from Los Angeles straight to Hawaii with one mission: to intimidate or possibly eliminate Eminem. The mood flipped instantly. This wasn't a vacation anymore. Families who thought they were on holiday suddenly found themselves in survival mode. Big Nas described the shocking reality: bodyguards and rappers strapping on bulletproof vests, firearms being checked and rechecked, wives sitting beside armed men, and kids caught in the middle of it all. That's how serious the threat felt. He said flat out, "Yeah, it was supposed to be a vacation, but it wasn't. We all had our wives. Some people had their kids with them. We thought it was a vacation, but it ended up being a problem the moment we got off the plane." Instead of lays and sunshine, the group was met by Honolulu police, who rushed them into secure vans like they were escaping a war zone. For the rest of the trip, local police stayed glued to their side. Interscope Records even had to shell out for official Honolulu PD protection, because Suge's influence reached so far, even the islands weren't safe. Big Nas wasn't the only one who remembered the Hawaii madness. Another key figure stepped in with his own story: Reggie Wright Jr. For those who don't know, Reggie was no random name in the game. He had been a police officer before flipping into the role of head of security for Death Row Records, making him one of Suge Knight's most trusted insiders. His word carried weight. According to Reggie, Dr. Dre and his camp were set to roll through Power 106 in LA as part of a big promotional push. The campaign promised lucky fans tickets to an exclusive concert in Hawaii featuring Dre, Snoop Dogg, and none other than Eminem. But here's where the twist comes in. Reggie claimed he caught wind of those plans and immediately passed the intel to Suge Knight. If true, that meant Suge had advance notice, and it wasn't just coincidence that his shadow followed Eminem all the way to paradise. Even crazier, Reggie admitted he was actually on that same trip to Hawaii, flying alongside Snoop, Dre, and Eminem. He described the wild tension that went down when Suge's presence was allegedly felt, and how it turned what should have been a party into pure paranoia. Luckily, at the end of the day, no blood was spilled. Everybody walked away alive. But the close call cemented one thing: Suge Knight's reach was no joke, and even oceans couldn't protect you from it. For fans, hearing these war stories years later brought mixed feelings. Some found dark humor in the chaos, but most felt straight-up disappointment. One fan wrote, "Good to see Big Reggie admit their faults. Even as a die-hard Death Row fan, hearing these stories makes you realize why the label crumbled. Too much drama, too much danger." Another fan put it bluntly, "People love real stories. Damn, Reg, this is ID channel level stuff. These stories belong in a culture museum." And they weren't wrong. Suge's attempt to intimidate Eminem in Hawaii had all the markings of a true crime episode. But what made it legendary was the fact that, despite his power and army of loyal soldiers, Suge still couldn't break Eminem. At a time when Suge bent everyone to his will, Eminem's refusal to fold was almost unthinkable. But here's where the story flips. Eminem wasn't the only one bold enough to stand tall. Another young rapper, fearless and hungry, would soon land on Suge's radar: 50 Cent. 50 Cent always knew where he was headed, straight to the top of the rap game. His grind was undeniable, and the first person to truly recognize it was Eminem. After hearing 50's Guess Who's Back CD, M didn't waste a second. He hit up Dr. Dre and told him, "You need to check this guy out." Dre gave it a listen, and the rest was history. With Eminem's co-sign, 50 was quickly signed to Aftermath, and his path to superstardom was sealed. That move, though, set the stage for a whole new war. The second 50 got signed, his name crossed paths with one of the most feared figures in the business, Suge Knight. Suddenly, this hungry rapper from Queens wasn't just trying to survive. He was now shoulder to shoulder with Dre and Eminem, the very people Suge had been clashing with for years. To Suge, that made 50 an automatic rival. At the time, Suge had just gotten out of prison after serving a 5-year bid. He was trying to rebuild Death Row Records, fix the wreckage of his empire, and re-establish himself as the industry's most powerful figure. What he didn't see coming was that a new force was rising: 50 Cent, backed by M and Dre, with the kind of momentum that couldn't be stopped. By 2002, 50's breakout hit In Da Club was about to explode. On the set of the music video, a moment that would define his career, tension hit a boiling point. In the middle of the shoot, someone suddenly shouted, "Suge Knight is here!" And just like that, the room shifted. Suge didn't walk in alone. He rolled deep, allegedly with 30 men at his side. making sure his presence was felt before he even said a word. This wasn't a visit, it was intimidation, plain and simple. His crew swarmed the set, making it clear that Suge was still watching, still demanding respect, and still ready to check anyone who dared rise without his blessing. Most rappers would have panicked, most would have bowed their heads, but 50 wasn't built like that. Instead of begging for mercy, he stared Suge and his entourage down with zero fear, refusing to back off for even a second. Big Suge wanted to break him, but 50 gave him nothing. The standoff ended without violence, but the message was loud and clear. 50 Cent wasn't afraid of the so-called boogeyman. He went right back to finishing one of the most iconic videos in hip-hop history, a video that would launch him into global fame. Suge walked away without the reaction he expected, realizing that this young rapper wasn't someone he could scare into submission. Why Suge showed up that exact day has always been a mystery, but according to Eminem, there may have been more to the story than just a random visit. Eminem never believed Suge Knight's appearance on the set of In Da Club was some random coincidence. To him, it was too perfectly timed, too deliberate. M later suggested Suge had every reason to make a statement that day, because 50 Cent represented a shift Suge couldn't control. Think about it. By 2002, Death Row was already crumbling. Tupac was gone, Doctor. Dre had walked away years earlier, and Snoop Dogg had moved on too. Meanwhile, Eminem and Dre were building a whole new empire with 50 Cent as the face of the next generation. For Suge, who had built his reputation on fear and dominance, watching a former protege like Dre create a superstar out of someone he didn't own must have been unbearable. So when 50 was on the verge of exploding worldwide with his debut, Suge showed up with 30 men in red, almost like he was sending a warning, don't forget who runs this game. But that's exactly where the intimidation failed. 50 wasn't some scared newcomer. He had already survived getting shot 9 times on the streets of Queens. A stare down with Suge and his entourage wasn't going to break him. If anything, it made him more defiant. Industry insiders later whispered that Suge had been tracking 50 for a while, watching his rise under Eminem's wing, and saw him as a direct threat to whatever power Death Row had left. Showing up at that music video wasn't about chance. It was about control. But when 50 didn't bow down, Suge realized his fear tactics weren't enough anymore. Fans who looked back on that moment saw it as a passing of the torch in hip-hop power. One fan commented years later, that was the day Suge found out intimidation didn't work on everybody. 50 stared down the boogeyman and kept rapping like nothing happened. Another said, if you ever needed proof, 50 was built different. Just watch how he moved after Suge tried to check him. The irony? Suge Knight, once the most feared man in the industry, had walked into a room expecting to crush a rookie, and instead left realizing he couldn't touch him. 50's fearless reaction only boosted his legend. That video, In Da Club, went on to dominate the charts and solidify his place as hip-hop's next global superstar. For Eminem, it was confirmation of what he already believed. Suge's empire was losing its grip, and the future belonged to him, Dre, and 50. The showdown with 50 Cent was more than just a tense moment on a video set. It marked the turning point in Suge Knight's legacy. For years, his reputation was built on fear, intimidation, and sheer dominance. But after failing to rattle Eminem in public or stop 50 in his tracks, the cracks in Suge's empire were impossible to ignore. The boogeyman of hip-hop was finally losing his grip. In the streets and in the industry, people started whispering about what they saw. Suge had rolled in with 30 men to shut down a rookie and still walked away empty-handed. Meanwhile, In Da Club became the anthem of 2003, blasting on every radio station, climbing to the top of Billboard and catapulting 50 into global superstardom. That success was the ultimate slap in Suge's face. The intimidation not only failed, it backfired, making 50 look even more untouchable. For Eminem, this was validation. He had stood his ground against Suge's threats, watched 50 do the same, and together with Dr. Dre, they formed an unshakable trio. They weren't just making music, they were reshaping the entire balance of power in hip-hop. Death Row's era of dominance was over, and Shady, Your Aftermath was now the new empire. Industry insiders called it poetic justice. For years, Suge had controlled artists through fear, dangling contracts, sending threats, flexing his gang ties. But when it came to Eminem and 50 Cent, none of that worked. They were too bold, too reckless, and too battle-tested to fold. Suge's playbook was officially outdated. Fans later described the whole saga as the moment the torch passed. One said, "That's when we all knew it. Suge couldn't bully his way through hip-hop anymore. The game belonged to M, Dre, and 50. Another added, "Suge used to be the nightmare, but once 50 laughed in his face, that power was gone." And they were right. The early 2000s became the reign of 50 Cent and Eminem, while Suge Knight's name shifted from feared mogul to a cautionary tale. Instead of controlling the charts, Suge was dealing with lawsuits, arrests, and eventually prison sentences. His attempts to crush his rivals only cemented their place in history as legends who survived the storm. Looking back, the Suge Knight saga against Eminem and 50 Cent feels almost unreal, like a crime thriller that played out in real life. Suge, once untouchable, tried everything in his playbook: intimidation, fear tactics, even alleged assassination attempts, but none of it worked. Eminem stood tall, 50 stood louder, and together with Dr. Dre, they flipped the entire game upside down. By the mid-2000s, it was obvious. The age of death row was dead. The once mighty Suge Knight couldn't control the new wave. Instead, he became a symbol of what happens when fear loses its power. Eminem kept dominating charts with back-to-back hits, while 50 Cent turned into one of the most unstoppable forces in music. They weren't just rappers anymore. They were survivors who stared down the boogeyman and refused to blink. Fans who lived through it still talk about it like a cultural shift. One fan put it best: that wasn't just music beef, that was a war between two eras. Suge represented the old school of fear and violence, while M and 50 represented the new school of resilience and independence. Another fan added, "If Suge couldn't break them, then no one could." And that's what makes this story legendary. For years, Suge's shadow haunted the industry. But the day he tried to shake Eminem and 50 and failed, everything changed. He wasn't the unstoppable monster anymore. He was just a man losing control of his empire. Meanwhile, Eminem and 50 only grew stronger, their legacies carved in stone. When you really think about it, the signs were always there. Based on everything from the whispered assassination plots to the in-dog club standoff, it's hard not to believe Suge Knight showed up at that studio with one mission: to finish 50 Cent once and for all. That was Suge's way, flexing power through fear, making sure no one dared rise without his blessing. But this time, it didn't work. Fast forward to now, and the contrast couldn't be any clearer. Suge Knight, once the terror of hip-hop, sits behind bars with no clear path to freedom. The man who once moved like a kingpin, feared by artists and execs alike, has lost every ounce of influence he fought so hard to build. His name went from legendary to infamous, his legacy drowned in violence, prison time, and downfall. Meanwhile, Eminem and 50 Cent didn't just survive, they thrived. They turned near-death encounters into fuel for two of the most successful rap careers ever. Both are now celebrated not only as rappers, but as icons who redefine what resilience in hip-hop looks like. And their brotherhood, that bond forged in chaos, became just as legendary as their music. Fans still point to it as proof of loyalty in an industry built on betrayal. So here we are years later, the so-called boogeyman silenced, while his rivals are cemented as legends. The story of Suge, Eminem, and 50 isn't just about music, it's about power, survival, and what happens when intimidation finally meets its match. But what do you think? Was Suge Knight's downfall truly sealed the moment he failed to break Eminem and 50 Cent? Or was it destiny that these two were always going to rise, no matter who stood in their way? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you made it this far, sound off. Do you think M and 50 were untouchable or just lucky survivors? Make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives like this.